Okay, welcome back. Hour number 2, and we get to talk to Frosty Wooldridge this hour. Now, if you look in guests, look under Frosty's name, there are a couple of very interesting things to look at, and I hope you'll follow along. He sent me an article today, and he said that this author is so special and so extraordinary that whenever he writes something, he always reads it cover to cover, front to back. The guy's name is Leon Kolankowitz. Did I get that close, Frosty?
That's correct, Jeff, yes.
Kolankowitz. I've got a future here. All right. The article is called Pandemics and the Population, Lessons from the Coronavirus Catastrophe of 2020. Now, I honestly, when I was saying in November, December that 2020 was going to be hell on wheels, it has been and then some. And we're not nearly halfway through it yet. So this is a big deal. Tell us about this gentleman, Kolankowitz, and why he's such an extraordinary writer. The articles are under Frosty's name. You can pull it up right now and start going through it if you want. We are going to go through it in some detail. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and to each and every one of you listening across the globe this evening. Obviously, we're all in this together. I can't spell that out enough. And also, another column that was published on Rense.com by yours truly talks about no less than 10 foot and now 17 feet of social distancing, but also staying away from crowded situations, and really treasuring your good health and that of your families. And I also talk in that piece just about what we can do individually and the new normal in this country. Jeff and I have talked earlier today some of the things that are going to continue, and there's no question in my mind that we're in a new normal at this point in time. And this article, I think, on several levels is very important because Jeff and I have been talking about it for almost 20 years now. And the article that you're going to read with Leon, he's a man who's traveled as much as I have.
Wow, that's saying a lot.
That's saying a lot. I mean, that's saying a lot. And his piece is called Pandemics and Population, Lessons from the Coronavirus Catastrophe of 2020 by Leon Kolankowitz. And he right now is essentially the chief scientific director at numbersusa.org. And has worked with Roy Beck. And of course, you all know Roy Beck. I'm sure most of you have watched the 5-minute video, Immigration, Gumballs, and Poverty, and also off the charts, the 10-minute video that shows you the future of the United States if we continue on this massive, unending immigration, both legal and illegal, that's continuing to explode this country and also compact us in our cities. And one of the things about Leon is he's seen what I've seen. He's seen the wet markets there in China. He's seen the filth in all of Asia. Again, I can't begin to describe, but many of you may have seen on Facebook a 4-minute video showing how in the wet markets, the Chinese and even the Indians, they have dogs in cages. They boil them in fat. They burn off their hair with blow torches and then literally throw them in vats of oil.
No. This is medieval evil. It's weird.
Oh yeah. This is
not
beyond
first world behavior. No.
Yeah, this is Dark Ages. This is before Dark Ages. The cruelty of the Chinese for animals, and certainly in the Middle East also, is pre-Dark Ages. There is no humanity here. It's just they will eat and boil and cook and shish kebab anything.
Somebody sent me
living.
Let me pop this in here. Somebody sent me a video, and I can only look at it for 20 seconds, maybe. And after the first 5 or 10, I could see some cook was getting ready to put something in a frying pan. It was hot, full of grease. He put a live cat in there,
Right.
hair and all. A live cat. He whapped it on the head and put a live cat in a frying pan. This is China. All right? This is communist China today. This is not first world, not second, third. It's fourth or fifth world, and it is Dark Ages, and it is medieval, it is Gothic, and it is one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. That's not to say that all Chinese are that way, but they've got wet markets in every major city and probably every minor city. This is what they do. Go on.
That's what they do. And let me remind you that this is what I got to see back when I traveled through China. And it changed my worldview. And it's the reason I'm on this program with Jeff all these years later, because when you see the world with your eyes at first hand, and certainly at 12 miles an hour on a bicycle, you get a touch of the world that most people don't. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, let's go to Beijing," and we'll look at Beijing and Hangzhou and Kulin and Shanghai and all that stuff. But if you go through there like I went through there, I didn't stay at the Wall of China hotel. I didn't stay at I stayed in little $10 a night square rooms, 6 by 6 by 8. And, that's what I did because that's the kind of money I had. But I also got a chance to get to the ground level. And Leon is the same way. And when you travel through these arenas, I traveled to Ecuador and certainly all of South America and saw the filth that's going on there. And it has to do with illiteracy. It has to do with illiteracy that creates the culture that creates the filth. And that's why, like you look over in Asia, the average age of life is around 49 years of age. It's because they have so many worms crawling in them. They have so many diseases that are exploding. The lack of sanitation is just beyond comprehension.
What's the average life expectancy, Frosty, in most third world countries? 49.
49 years. Yeah, that's right. 49 years of age.
For our audience here in the U.S. and Western Europe, civilized parts of the world, the human body, even under the best of circumstances, remains the potential host of over 130 different parasites. We're all vulnerable. We should all take parasite cleanses at least once a year. Go ahead.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I do myself. And after all my travels around the third world over the last 45 years, I've always come back and had a fecal check, a urine check, and a blood check. Because you want to make sure that there's any chance for such things as Chagas or malaria or Lyme's disease. These are all parasites.
We got nearly 1 million cases of Chagas in this country now. Most of them are confined to the illegal alien invaders who have come in here and brought it with them. But it is spreading, and that's a tragedy because that's a no treatment disease. That's a slow burn to the next life, is what it is.
Well, that's exactly right. And for those of you who don't know about Chagas, just look it up. It's called the kissing bug disease. Carlos Bastros, I think, wrote a book. You can look it up. But it affects around 16 to 18 million South Americans and kills 50,000 a year. And once you get the Chagas parasite injected into you by the kissing bug, and I forget the official name of it, it goes into your body, and then it starts. It just simply multiplies and attacks your heart, number one, and your organs. And in fact, I think it was Charles Darwin died of Chagas disease because he picked it up when he was in South America.
I didn't know that.
Yep, that's what they finally. That's what did him in. Fortunately, he got to live most of his life, but that last trip to South America and the Galapagos Islands, and I've gone everywhere he's gone. I'm always thankful that I was always alert and I checked my body and had an outstanding tent completely enclosed to make sure I didn't get those diseases.
Did you bicycle over to the Galapagos Islands, Frosty? Did you?
Yeah. I spent 14 days in the Galapagos Islands. I went scuba diving. I got to see the blue-footed boobies, the masked boobies. I got to see the iguanas, the sea iguanas. I got to see them diving under the water.
Wow.
To see those blue-footed boobies, and then I got to see the blue-footed booby dance. I got to see the waved albatross jumping off the cliffs. I went through their nests. The frigate birds that are, they're just extraordinary.
Oh, they're big, big birds.
Oh, yeah, they're huge. Tremendous wingspan, and they fly around a couple thousand feet up in the sky. I got to have the tropical penguins. I had big seals. The big seals charged me. We were diving in their area, and one big buck of a seal came out and charged us and scared the living pants off me. But it was extraordinary to have the little tropical penguins flying around at our feet, and so that was an extraordinary 14 days. You can see, like the Darwin's finches. You can see how all of the I went through 8 different islands, and you can see where everything evolved in its own way to match the islands themselves and the food and the colors.
Their
and
environment,
you name it.
Sure, they fit like a glove, hand in a glove. This is what I want to point out to our listeners. What you just heard from Frosty, these things were just rolling off his tongue. Frosty has seen and experienced more of the world, arguably, than maybe anybody else there is. I don't know. You can't see more of the world than what Frosty Wooldridge has seen bicycling it. 12 miles an hour?
12 miles an hour. I could write a book.
You have. But I mean, you have seen this planet like few other humans ever have or ever will. And that's just incredible.
It has been, I'm 73 years old, and it has been a wonderful, marvelous, stupendous, amazing adventure for the last, since 50 years since I've been out of college. And I'm thankful, and I have great gratitude that I got to live through all of it. But it's also, I didn't realize that it was preparing me for the last part of my life to bring the knowledge and bring the understandings of what the human race faces here in the 21st century. Probably along with somebody like Leon Kalankowitz, and Roy Beck, and certainly Dr. Jack Alpert, who you can go to skill.org, and he is right on the same path and this guy's out of Stanford, and he's got an Einstein brain. He's brilliant. We've skied together, and we've hiked together, and we've biked together over the years. But if you go to skill.org, he shows you the same things that I've been talking about on the videos. And that to me is the key here. We need to pay attention to the Jack Alperts out there, and the Roy Becks out there, and the Leon Kalankowitzes out there, and the Fred Elbels, and certainly the Jenny Goldies and Madeline Welds, the women that are out there also speaking the same things that I'm speaking about, because these are the canaries, if you will. These are the journalistic, scientific canaries telling us that this mine is getting overloaded, and we're all going to pay some very big consequences. Yeah. And so in this piece, I would really highly recommend you all reading this piece, because you need to know what is coming. And he ties these points in. So it's not just me speaking once again, but he says, although immigration policies in every country have always been partly about keeping out dangerous diseases, immigration plays only a small role in pandemics like the one that is beginning to paralyze the United States. Yet there are serious overlapping forces behind pandemics and mass immigration. He says, the current pandemic is perhaps the inevitable outcome of an unprepared, globalized, borderless, overpopulated world. And the importance of borders is clear. In addition to all the obvious medical measures, more than ever, the world needs borders, population stabilization, and more ethical approaches to our non-human neighbors, in other words, the animals, on this ever smaller planet. unquote. Drink that in.
Yeah.
Because again, I'll connect the dots for you.
Ever more diseased planet.
Well, yes, and also, as I've talked about in the past, the catastrophic climate destabilization that's going on that is killing off, 100 species a day. And he talks about that. And then I've talked about it in my forthcoming book, America's Overpopulation Predicament, Blindsiding Future Generations, which will be out sometime in October. We are disrupting the very balancing systems that allow this planet to be balanced and to have species balance and to have everything and everyone thriving. I'll give you an example tonight. I think there was 30 people. There was all these tornadoes across the midsection here of the United States from Oklahoma right through into Tennessee. And I'm not sure, but was there something like 10 or 30 deaths? I'm not sure, but I know a lot of deaths have occurred. And you see all of these people and all of these houses are smashed, and entire cities are just obliterated by these very hot tornadoes going on. Well, if there weren't so many people in those arenas and in those areas, you wouldn't have all this death and destruction. And so that's why when you hear and you understand or you read from these very valid individuals who've already experienced this stuff, we have to ask ourselves, why are we on course, and why are we allowing our country to add another 110 million immigrants into this country legally? And what are going to be the consequences? What are the ramifications? What are the ramifications as to the environment, as to the catastrophic climate destabilization, as to ecological footprint? And I think you all have heard me talk about ecological footprint and the damage it does, but also you're talking about water footprint. You're talking about energy footprint. You're talking about contamination footprint. You're talking about exhaust footprint. And I talk about these in my book. And so that's what we're facing. And either we do something about it, each one of us, in our own cities, in our own families, in our own
right in your own backyard.
Your own backyard. We need to have, again, we need a national, we need a state by state, we need a national discussion, debate on what kind of a civilization we're going to hand over to our children. And thus far, that's not going on, because everything is hell-bent for exponential growth. The editor, Patricia Calhoun of Westford Magazine here in Denver, Colorado, is considering publishing a piece I talked about for Colorado implementing a population stabilization policy. And there are several other writers like yours truly here in Colorado who are asking the same thing, because I can tell you this: Colorado is turning into a gridlock nightmare and an air pollution nightmare. Denver, Colorado is not a fun place to live, because every breath you take is filled with 100 different toxin exhausts. And as you can see Denver every day with this massive brown cloud that is so toxic, and everybody's breathing it, and all that god-awful toxin is going into their brains, it's going into the brains of their children, and the chemicals that all go with that. And you have to wonder, why are we doing this to ourselves? And Denver's traffic is as bad or worse than L.A., and L.A. is the worst in the world. Well, L.A. is one of the worst 10 top worst gridlock cities in the world. And how do I know? Because I've traveled through all the top 20, 30 worst, biggest cities in the world. Mm-hmm. And why aren't we forcing a discussion? Why aren't we, the citizens, you and me, every one of you listening today, what can you do to push a massive national, statewide, and discussion on what kind of a civilization we want to build and to grow? Do we want a thriving, sustainable, balanced homeostasis country called the United States of America? or do we want another India or Bangladesh or Mexico? Anybody want to move to Mexico and live there?
With even more of an intensive caste system than we have now, and that's coming. That's coming.
Oh yeah, it truly is. You know, and I hear, I've gone to a couple of websites. One of them is called Mind to Do, and it's an all black Facebook page, and all you see on that page is all of these African Americans just complaining of how bad it is over here, and how much the racism is just put them down and everything else, and but none of them are migrating back to Africa.
Funniest thing, isn't it?
Isn't it the funniest irony that all they do is complain and they've had this bad thing and that bad thing and everything else?
They're all victims.
But you don't see them going back to Africa where they could be in the majority and there would be no racism.
To call them hypocrites would be too kind, Frosty.
It would be.
They're dirtbag, slime, opportunists. They know exactly what they're doing. They're professional victims, and it's all a scam. And they should be picked up, carted away, and flown home and dropped off, either at the airport or above the airport. I really don't care.
Yeah, well, and I would like to see Maxine Waters be the lead on the plane going back, so she could finally become a happy person along
These
with
people are
Hudson
picked up,
and John Lewis and so forth.
Yes, John Lewis. Yes, these people are picked up on the streets, and if I don't like to overstate these things. They're picked up with the clothes on their backs. We saw that courtesy of the video of the whistleblower who was working with the UN Refugee Resettlement Program in Missouri. She told the whole story. It's all lies. They're picking these people up and dumping them off here as part of the international globalist effort to destroy what's left of America. That's what's happening. We'll be right back. Hold on. Okay, here we are. And let me get this set. There we go. Okay, Frosty and I are talking about a lot of really important things. What happens to most Americans is that they unfortunately seem to think it's a reflex, that the rest of the world is kind of just like us in many ways. It's not. We have had the highest standard of living in the world. As a large nation state. We had cultural values, we had great art, great music, and then came big-time sports. All right, whatever. We had all the things that a society and a culture would want. I'm talking about the 1950s. We had a choice to make. Which way were we going to go? Were we going to continue to maintain our control through our Constitution of our way of life, or at least try to increase it? Or were we going to sit back and be intoxicated and inebriated with the hedonistic lifestyle that big business, Madison Avenue, and greed was proffering to us 24/7 on the mass media? And unfortunately, we were drugged into a stupor and took door number 2. And it took us slowly but inexorably down into the garbage of first and a half world status and now second world status. And if you go into our big cities, LA, San Francisco, for example, you will see third world status and below. Third world cities don't even feature people defecating and urinating in the streets. That's how bad it's gotten here. So was it stolen from us, or did we allow it to be taken from us? Unfortunately, we allowed it. By our silence, we allow. Never forget that. Frosty, go ahead.
Well, and there's no question that we have allowed it. The 1965 Immigration Reform Act, I will literally call Senator Teddy Kennedy the father of the destruction of America. Pierre Trudeau could be called the father of the destruction of Canada.
Agreed.
And those two individuals really have destroyed North America with this unlimited call for multiculturalism and diversity. But one of the things that's beyond that everybody's going to pay a severe and dear price, is the fact that we're being compacted like sardines I mean, back when we were only 194 million, when I was a 10, 15-year-old kid, man, the highways were free and clear.
Right.
The cities were just wonderful. You could go to the national parks and you could have an experience in Yosemite that was just wilderness, like John Muir. Today, go to any national park of any merit, the top 10 national parks, you can't park. Glacier National, I was there last summer. It is a nightmare. I mean, it's a living, breathing nightmare. There are people crawling all over Glacier National Park at the top of Logan Pass. The parking lot is literally crammed, jammed, and shoved up. You got air pollution everywhere. You can't get a campground. You can't get a motel. You can't get anything. And the prices are sky high. Why? Because literally the Chinese have taken over the national parks. That's all you hear is Chinese, and then there's a few of us speak English, and we're Americans. At some point, you will not be able to go to the national parks. You'll have to draw a lottery ticket, and you might get in and you might not. But one of the things that we're all facing, and I'm going to quote Leon here, and he said, if they could speak, what would the viruses of the world call millions of weakened, malnourished people living in overpopulated conditions? Mm-hmm. And the answer is a feast.
Yeah.
The more you compact human beings, mm-hmm. and the more you multiculturalize and diversify cultures that are like China's culture or India's culture, or even just the same thing down in Mexico, where there is no sanitation, where there is little sanitation, where there is a lack of, again, did I not say this previously? 66% of India, with 1.3 billion people, they don't have access to a toilet. In Africa,
66%.
The estimates are somewhere around 90%.
That's 650 million, 700 million people in India. In Africa, it's 90% of 1.1 billion. So let's call it a billion people basically have no access to toilets. This is all right. All right.
I know. I bring you all this.
Taken. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is sobering reality. And yet we are importing these people into the United States at 100,000 legally every month. And that...
Now, keep in mind, hold on. Frosty, this is Donald J. Trump. This is legal immigration that he promised was going to be stopped for 6 months. He didn't stop it for 6 seconds. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's correct, and neither has the entire Congress. I mean, none of our, except for Tom Cotton of Arkansas, I think it was 2 years ago, promoted a bill to cut all legal immigration in half to somewhere around 500,000 a year, which is still going to drive us to well over 100 million more people into this country. Because of birth rates and the chain migration. And, of course, that all got trounced. And what's really disgusting is that the corporate heads, the big money people in New York who run the stock market, they're the ones that are pushing for more immigration. They're the ones that are doing everything they can to continue, again, this Faustian bargain. That's to literally force the luxury of the moment, make and spend and produce and create wealth so that the Faustian bargain doesn't care about the future. It has no ethics, no morality, and all it does is care about who can drive their Learjet right now to the detriment of our environment, our quality of life, and our standard of living in just the next 2 or 3 decades. And that's what owns all of those elected officials, such as a Nancy Pelosi or a Charles Schumer or the late John McCain, or I can just go right on down the list. There are very few integrable senators in Congress, and certainly very few. They're all in a minority. I guarantee you this, because the majority of the U.S. Congress, that's the senators, 535 congressmen and House members and senators, They are pushing this. They are not doing anything to stop it. And so as we get compacted, the predictable catastrophes are going to multiply, as Leon talks about in his piece here. And then we all get to be victims because we sat by and let this happen. And that, to me, is the travesty against our own children, that we watched it happen, we said nothing, we did nothing, and we still have done nothing. And again, I am not sure. In fact, I have no optimism that our borders will be shut down in the next year, 5 years, or 10 years.
Never, Frosty. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
They'll stay just like they are. We're being pushed headlong into very harsh socialism here. Socialism is NAFTA. What's the new name of it? I can't remember now. Anyway, it's the new version of NAFTA. It's got Mexico.
The TTP. Was it
No,
the TTP?
No. It's and I'm embarrassed. I can't remember it. Anyway, it was just signed into law by the Orange Man a few months ago. It's NAFTA.
Okay.
It's an enhanced NAFTA. Is what it is.
It's a repeat,
so
is all it is.
We're in trouble. There's not going to be a border wall. There never was going to be a border wall. It was all a lie. It was a con job. He hasn't built, a month and a half ago, he hadn't built 1 foot of new border wall. All he had done was somehow authorize, with his supposedly taking money from the Pentagon and the military, the rehabilitation of existing border fences, which were falling apart. Now, the new ones that have been built in the place of the old ones that were falling apart, in the same place, they're not new fencing, they're replacement fencing. You've seen them. They're the very tall steel slats. Well, the Mexicans came up with portable, like a chainsaw, a grinding wheel on it, and they cut right through the steel. And they could even drive cars through there. You know this. You brought it up.
I saw it.
But our people don't.
I saw it last summer when I biked from San Diego. And the other thing that's ironic about that whole wall is the fact that there has been no enforcement internally against the big employers of illegal aliens, such as Marriott Hotels, Chipotle's, Mexican Grill, La Quinta, the Tyson Chicken, Hormel Foods, all of these big corporations who buy off the Senate and the House members. I mean, they bribe them. That's the reason why there's no enforcement, again, of U.S. Code 8, Section 1324. If they would simply enforce that law that's on the books, has been for over 30 years, I guarantee you, nobody would hire an illegal alien and nobody would be coming over here because there aren't any jobs and you wouldn't have any way to support yourself. And they certainly should stop educating all these illegals' kids and stop the food, EBT cards, and certainly the breakfast and lunches for all of these kids, because it's killing the American taxpayer. I, to this day, do not understand how those literally unethical members of Congress can continue to do this, and they get away with it. That is the stunning aspect.
Oh, no accountability. No, come on. It's criminality. Criminals don't have to pay. Criminals aren't caught in government. When you're a professional politician, you're a professional criminal in 90% of the cases. Nancy Pelosi is also a professional traitor to the formerly United States of America. They're pushing right now in Congress, under the terrible noise and stress and chaos of this coronavirus thing, Nancy, that little greasy Nancy, is pushing, let me find the number, HR, what is it? It's the most draconian, outrageous, unconstitutional gun control law ever to come out of the House, or to try to come out of the House. And it may get out. With her pushing it, it'll probably get out. This is outrageous. That we have a Constitution. It's H.R. 5717. That's it. Pelosi's trying to sneak H.R. 5717. It's the most aggressive unconstitutional gun control bill I've ever seen. Right through the House under this terrible stress and strain and angst of this pandemic. So these people are not only criminals, but they're traitors to America. That's the problem. They're communists.
They're certainly working against us, and they're working against the U.S. Constitution. Now, one other thing I want to bring up that Leon brought up, and each person listening to this broadcast, understand this, because this, in the end, will affect you. This led to a certain complacency on the part of society when all scientists knew that, number one, nature abhors a vacuum. Number two, nature is dynamic, not static or stagnant. And number three, organisms evolve. The moment we began throwing antibiotics at microbial bugs was the very moment they began to evolve resistance to them. Feeding antibiotics to increase the growth and profitability of livestock destined for our dinner tables was not an optimal long-term strategy to manage and integrate food production and public health. Then third, zoonotic diseases, those caused by viruses, bacteria, and parasites that can spread from non-human animals or wildlife to human beings, are a major threat to Homo sapiens. Some 75% of emerging infectious diseases we face are believed to come from animals. These include the coronavirus at the center of the current pandemic. As you can see, Leon knows what he's talking about, and here is what we're facing. Why do you think Chinese are, again, as I've said, streaming into British Columbia as fast as they can chain migrate and literally leave their own country? Because China, with 1.4 billion people, is a sardine can of just desperate people crushed, crammed, and jammed into that literally small place called China. And now it's exploding. The Chinese are exploding into Europe, into Canada, certainly into the United States of America.
South America, Africa. In Africa, they built those entire ghost cities. Huge ghost cities in Africa.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And so what I'm saying is, if we don't stop this kind of migration into our own country, if we sit by and ignore it,
right? Which we are. We're not holding Trump accountable. We're not demanding that the guy be. He should have been removed. He should have been impeached for lying about the border issue. What did he do about the border issue? You know what he did? Put Jerry Kushner in charge of it. And he put Jerry Kushner on his new Coronavirus Task Force number 2, along with the princess. He also put Jerry in charge of Middle East peace. He also put Jerry in charge of negotiations and tariff issues with China. God knows what else he's put Jerry in charge of. We're being run by President Kushner here. Believe it.
Well, there's no question, whatever and whomever is at the center of this. Again, my expertise is in the compaction of humans, which then detrimentally affects the natural world. I'm just going to give another example here out of Leon's piece. At the same time, humans have spread diseases to remaining wildlife populations around the world, including the fungus that causes the white nose syndrome, which has wiped out tens of millions of bats in eastern North America. And the disease that they catch is something like cyanotridomyosis, the lethal fungus causing a precipitous worldwide decline in amphibian populations. So what he's showing here is that if you're riding your bicycle, and you're probably going 10, 12, 15 miles an hour, and somebody throws a wrench into your rear sprocket, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to tear off your derailleur, it's going to bust your chain, and it's going to break all of your spokes, and you're going to crash. That's what's happening to nature. And the more we continue to literally outstrip nature's ability to maintain a balance, that is a consequence that's going to grow. And as I've said, we lose 100 species a day worldwide because of overpopulation of human beings, and that's called the sixth extinction session, and that's verified by look it up, Oxford University, the Norman Myers, MYERS, 40 years study on the sixth extinction session. How many listening to this broadcast tonight think we're going to survive as we destroy the very foundation of the animal world, the web of life that nurtures us, that sustains us? And if you think it's so great, according to the Interior Department here in the United States, I think the latest extinction rates for North America, or at least the 48 states, is around 250 creatures per year because of habitat destruction and contamination by chemicals, and that's 2,500 creatures every 10 years. Dear fellow Americans, Canadians, and world citizens, we, at some point, being at the top of that particular very unstable natural world situation, we're going to crash. And that's what he talks about in this column. Again, go to Rense.com, read this column to give yourself an understanding of why we have to absolutely stop all immigration in the United States and why we have to have a national conversation, more than just on Rense. We have to have a national conversation on every major TV show. 60 Minutes ought to have me on their show next week to bring these facts. Certainly, even CNN with Anderson Cooper. Certainly with Fox News with either Jesse. I don't care, any and all.
They
these
won't
top
touch
people.
Frosty. Frosty
well, I know
is
that.
literally being quarantined from any major exposure, and has been. Yeah. He's too hot to handle. It's too much truth. They don't want it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I can bring the truth. And I think it was A Few Good Men when Jack Nicholson said to Tom Cruise, "You can't handle the truth." Well, there's no question. At some point in time, whether it's 60 Minutes or NBC or ABC or NPR, the truth is going to slap them upside the head, whether it's 10 years from now or 20 years from now. The truth is going to nail them and their children up against the fence of reality, and all of us in this country are going to pay one hell of a nasty consequence of having added another 110 million immigrants to this country. And then, of course, the consequences, again, and I've said this before, I know all of you have watched Thelma and Louise, and remember they blew up a tanker and they did so many bad things on their way, that 96 T-Bird convertible, that they drove that car toward the cliff, and the cops were on them. And as they got there, they stopped for a second and said, "Oh, we don't want to go to prison. The consequences are too great." So they floored it, and they drove that 66 T-Bird over a cliff. Mm-hmm. Jeff, we're doing the same thing. I swear to God, we are just like the Titanic, headed toward the population iceberg. The consequences are going to continue to grow. They're going to become more literally more critical within our society, whether you look at the sociological impact of putting these incompatible cultures and certainly this one incompatible religion that's now starting to take hold in so many of our cities. I would invite anyone to go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and go look at and just travel through Somaliland. Don't do it at night. You might be okay during the day, but Somaliland with 125 Somalians with an average IQ of 68 is not really a good plan for your health to mingle with that particular crowd, or in South Chicago.
No.
So anyway, and also when you read this thing, there's pictures right here, the wet market of these bats. They put them on shish kebabs, they cook them, and then they eat them. When you see this, you just can't believe it. And yet that is what we're facing, and that's what we're turning our country into. I don't know if you know it or not, but we have a lot of people that came out of Asia that still, instead of having the dishes up in the cabinets over the stove and in the kitchen, they put chicken coops up there. Chicken coops. Because cultures don't change. They just simply bring what they bring. Into a first world country, they bring their third and fourth world cultures, and they practice them, and then we are all paying the consequences of all of that, Jeff. And
then some.
Oh, and then some, and the then some is going to be more than then some in the coming months and years.
Absolutely, yeah, it is. Yeah. Frosty, thank you.
This has been very informative.
It has. You've been great as always. Say hi to Sandy and be well.
I will do that.
Right? Good night.
Good night, Jeff. Thanks.
Frosty Wooldridge. And, he should have been on 60 Minutes 20 years ago. And Tucker won't even answer him. Can't. They're told not to. All right. Back in a flash. Hang on.